All right, Genesis 9, let's call this one Tiger, as in Tiger Woods, because not too long ago I was watching, I think, a couple of documentaries about Tiger Woods' early life, and a story about his dad's coaching stood out to me when, I'm probably going to butcher the story, at least a little bit, the whole concept of next hole was an emphasis at that stage in Tiger's development. It was Earl Woods telling Tiger no matter how bad the last shot was, he needed to be able to perform by the next hole. And there were two things that stood out to me from that. One, he didn't need to deny the quality of the shot, meaning he didn't need to pretend that it was something more than it was. Embrace the fact that was a horrible shot. But don't allow the emotions from that shot to linger to the point where you can't perform by the next hole. Why? Because a bad moment can easily turn into a slump, and that is what Earl Woods was counseling his son out of, to the tune of a career that ended up becoming legendary. No matter how much he's fallen since then, that advice helped produce a multiple-time champion. But one of the ironies of both that story and what we see in Genesis 9 is the way in which professional success can actually open the door to personal failure. Why? Because it's not always easy to deal with unhealthy emotions in personal life, because things come at you fast when you're just trying to live. And those things can sound cliche, but that's the reality. Why? Because Tiger Woods' professional success actually ended up making him isolated. And the interesting thing about those documentaries was the way in which they showed how his personal isolation caused him to crave validation in early years, and how that validation, that need for validation, might have actually had a role in his later personal failures, especially in marriage and ultimately in other ways. But whether that correlation is accurate or not, it reminded me of Noah. In chapter 9, he should be at a high point. He's basically survived the flood, but it's really describing the ways in which physical survival is just really the starting point. When, after leaving the ark, he becomes a man of the ground, plants a vineyard, and then gets drunk in that vineyard. See, the thing about the vineyard isn't so much that Noah got drunk. It's the way in which everything that happened afterward ended up turning into a legacy of family shame. One of the things in chapter 9 that's not said might be just as important as what is said. It doesn't talk a lot about Noah's emotional state on the ark. And one of the lessons I learned from that is just because emotions aren't discussed doesn't mean they aren't relevant. And so ultimately, when Noah is winning his life, doesn't necessarily mean it's not taking a toll on him emotionally, and that's not in some ways showing up in what happens in the vineyard. And that's all guesswork. But like I said, when Jesus warns about anxiety, he's not alone, because Paul the apostle warns us as well. And he gives us a broader warning maybe when he says, be anxious over nothing. And Peter will back that up by saying later on, cast your anxieties on God. And it seems like they are recognizing something that goes back to Earl Woods' advice to Tiger, which is understand that anxiety is nothing to overlook. If you can confront it at the time, that's probably the best way to go. But life doesn't always afford you the opportunity to deal with it at the time, as we said. And so counsel that Paul gives on anger might help us understand the second part of what Earl Woods said. And that is, look, don't let the sun go down on your anger. So we're not always going to have a convenient moment to deal with tough emotions like anxiety and anger, but we have to be conscious of the duration so that they don't produce personal slumps. And that's what Earl Woods was saying in moving on by the next hole. And ultimately, when we're looking at the story of Noah, one of the reasons why Jesus, Paul, and Peter are counseling us to try our best to confront our unhealthy emotions at the time is so that they don't lead back to vineyard moments. But the thing to remember about vineyard moments is that with Noah, the vineyard did not define his legacy. And so likewise, the reason why it's so important for us to learn how to deal with unhealthy emotions in a timely and efficient way is that we're still writing our legacy as well. And to the degree we can deal with our unhealthy emotions, we have the ability to make sure that our legacy is defined by the floods we've overcome in our lives, and not so much the vineyards we wish we could forget.